Introduction. Restoration of grand history beyond the geopolitics of center and periphery. The geographical position of the Korean Peninsula, protruding into the Pacific at the eastern edge of the Eurasian continent, has long acted as a double-edged sword in interpreting Korea's history. From the perspective of traditional historical geography or modern geopolitical views, the Korean Peninsula has often been perceived as a cul-de-sac, where continental civilization fiercely advanced eastward and then came to a halt, or as a periphery, subordinated to the overwhelming gravitational pull of the great Chinese civilization. Within this epistemological framework, the prehistoric era of the Korean Peninsula has been depicted as a passive space waiting for advanced cultures to arrive, with a time lag, having lost its independent momentum. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, imperialist archaeology systematized this perspective with the academic term cultural dependency theory. As a reaction to this, nationalist historiography emerged, denying the very connection with the outside and building a wall of racial purity called isolationist self-origin theory, which paradoxically resulted in isolating the Korean Peninsula from the flow of world history. However, in the 21st century, archaeology faced a significant turning point. The widespread use of precise radiocarbon dating methods, AMS, the remarkable advancement of ancient DNA, aDNA analysis technology, and big data analysis integrating climatic data have begun to illuminate the depths of the past that traditional historical studies or morphological archaeology could not reach. The newly revealed evidence eloquently demonstrates that the dichotomy of isolation and subordination that has defined the prehistoric era of the Korean Peninsula is an illusion created by modernity. This study re-examines key archaeological indicators of the prehistoric era on the Korean Peninsula, such as tanged points, comb pattern pottery, lute-shaped daggers, and megalithic culture, within the broader context of the Eurasian steppe. The core of the analysis is to prove that the Eurasian steppe is not just a simple physical space, but has evolved its function into a superhighway of physical movement, Paleolithic superhighway, a vast web of cultural ideas, Neolithic cultural web, and a crucible of ideological fusion and transformation, Bronze Age ideological crucible, that dynamically mediated the Korean Peninsula and tea. Through this report, we aim to reveal that the Korean Peninsula was not a periphery of the Eurasian continent, but an active node in a vast network where human movement, technological innovation, and the dissemination of ideas occurred. Furthermore, we seek to draw a more objective and integrative map of the connected prehistoric era that overcomes the outdated legacies of imperialism and nation. Part 1. The First Wave. The steppe as a superhighway and the late Paleolithic Revolution. About 50,000 years ago, the Earth's climatic environment and the history of human evolution reached a dramatic turning point. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, began to venture into the northern parts of the Eurasian continent, leaving Africa. During this period, the Eurasian steppe and the tundra regions of Siberia were not barren lands dominated by harsh cold. Rather, they were rich hunting grounds, inhabited by large mammals like mammoths, and a vast grassland highway stretching east to west without obstacles. This road has facilitated the fastest spread of technology and the movement of populations in human history. 1.1. The rediscovery of the Suyanggae Site. From the frontier to the front line of innovation. The Suyanggae Site, located by the Namhan River in Gyeongsong-myeon, Danyang, Chungcheongbuk-do, is a monumental site that has completely shaken the paradigm of late Paleolithic research in East Asia. The thousands of stone tools unearthed here, especially the microliths and microblades, prove that the Paleolithic people of the Korean Peninsula possessed the highest level of high-tech technology of their time. The most shocking thing was the dating. The radiocarbon dating results for the lowest cultural layer of the Suyanggae Site showed a date range of about 46,000 to 41,000 years ago, Cal BP. This data directly refuted the previous theory, which suggested that the Upper Paleolithic culture originating in Europe, such as the Aurignacian culture, reached East Asia via Siberia with a time lag of several thousand years, known as the Western-centric diffusion model. The flint tool of the water dog was made almost contemporaneously with similar stone tools in Europe, or even earlier in some regions. Such technological achievements do not merely represent a change in the way tools are made. The technique of creating a tang and combining it with a handle signifies that humanity has moved beyond the limitations of a single material like stone, entering the stage of composite tools that utilize heterogeneous materials such as wood or bone. This not only dramatically improved the range and penetration power of hunting tools, but also suggests a high level of cognitive leap in planning and designing the tools. 1.2. The Eurasian Techno-Complex and the Mystery of Concurrency. The true value of the Suyanggae Site is revealed only when it is placed on the vast map of Eurasia. We can find sites with remarkably similar technological characteristics and dating along the Eurasian steppe route. To the west, there is the Karabom site in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The early Upper Paleolithic IUP layer here is dated to around 49,000 to 45,000 years ago, sharing transitional characteristics such as stone tool production techniques centered on blade technology and the remnants of the Levallois technique. At the intermediate site of the Shiyu ruins in northern Shanxi province, China, obsidian was discovered alongside a small blade dating to about 45,000 years ago. The analysis of the source of this obsidian indicates that humans at that time were engaging in long-distance movement and exchange over hundreds of kilometers. The dating differences of these data are practically contemporary when considering the statistical margin of error. The fact that distances exceeding 3,000 kilometers from Altai to the Korean Peninsula were traversed in just a few hundred years, or at most within 1,000 years, suggests that the Eurasian steppe posed no geographical or ecological barriers to human migration at that time. Modern humans raced along this steppe highway. They did not settle down and gradually spread their culture, but instead moved quickly eastward, chasing prey or driven by curiosity. 1.3. Encounter with the Gunanggul cave remains. In search of the toolmakers. The significance of the Suyanggae Site is further amplified through its relationship with the Gunanggul cave site, located 9 kilometers nearby. The dating results of the modern human remains, such as leg bones found in Gunanggul cave, indicate an age of about 44,900 to 40,900 years ago, which precisely overlaps with the period of tool production at the Suyanggae Site. This is a very rare case in archaeology, where the person who made the tools human fossil and the tools they made artifact have been confirmed in the same spatio-temporal context. It is highly likely that the people of Gunanggul cave were the very protagonists who made the scrapers by the Suyong River and engaged in hunting. They left Africa and, at the end of their great journey across the Eurasian continent, arrived at a new land called the Korean Peninsula, where they fully demonstrated their technological capabilities. Furthermore, this flow did not stop on the Korean Peninsula, but led to a massive dispersal of humanity towards the American continent across the Bering Land Bridge. Therefore, the Sumba Jirige is not only an artifact that showcases the uniqueness of the Korean people, but also a piece of evidence from the decisive moment when modern humans were becoming a global species. Part 2. The second wave. Cultural web and the paradox of the Neolithic era. About 10,000 years ago, as the last ice age came to an end and the warm climate of the Holocene arrived, the landscape of the steppe changed dramatically. As sea levels rise, the terrain changes, and vast grasslands along with dense forests cover the northern hemisphere. These environmental changes have brought fundamental shifts in how humanity survives and connects. Instead of the highway that was racing ahead, an era of a vast cultural web has opened, where ideas and technologies slowly permeate and are shared. 2.1. The riddle of comb pattern pottery. The reversal of chronology and the collapse of paradigms. Comb pattern pottery, which symbolizes the Neolithic era of the Korean Peninsula, has long been a hot topic in Korean archaeology. This style, which features geometric patterns carved into the surface of the pottery with a comb-like tool, is widely found throughout Northern Eurasia, from Finland and the Scandinavian peninsula to Karelia in Russia, around Lake Baikal in Siberia, Mongolia and Manchuria, as well as the Korean Peninsula. In the early 20th century, archaeologists based on Eurocentrism and diffusionism explained this as the Siberian origin theory, or pit comb wear diffusion theory. A simple scheme was applied, stating that civilization originated in the west and spread to the east. However, the accumulation of radiocarbon dating data since the 1980s has utterly shattered this hypothesis. Korean Peninsula. The Gosanri-style pottery from the archaeological site of Gosanri in Jeju Island appeared around 8,000 BC, about 10,000 years ago, and typical comb pattern pottery has been confirmed across the Korean Peninsula from around 6,000 BC. Europe and Western Siberia. In contrast, the pottery culture of Northern Europe and Western Russia, which served as the basis for the Siberian origin theory, only emerged around 4,200 BC. This clear, chronological reversal mathematically proves that a one-way transmission from west to east was impossible. The fact that the pottery-making technology of the Korean Peninsula was thousands of years ahead of Europe strongly suggests that comb pattern pottery was not imported from outside, but rather an innovative product of the Korean Peninsula itself. 2.2. Convergent evolution and functionalist interpretation. Then why does the same morphological feature, striation, appear at both ends of the Eurasian continent? The most convincing model to explain this is convergent evolution. Just as different species in biology develop similar appearances when adapting to similar environments, e.g. sharks and dolphins, culture also derives similar solutions under similar environmental pressures. The vast forest steppe zone in Northern Eurasia shares an environment rich in rivers and lakes. The Neolithic people here relied more on hunting, gathering, and fishing rather than agriculture. For them, it was essential to have containers for cooking the fish they caught and storing the acorns they gathered. Pottery with a pointed or round base was optimized for being set into sandy areas or the ashes of a furnace. Additionally, it would have been necessary to engrave patterns to prevent slipping on the wet clay surface or to avoid bursting during the firing process. At this time, using readily available tools such as fish bones, seashells, or hair combs to stamp or draw patterns was the most natural idea that different human groups could independently devise. 2.3. Stimulus diffusion. An idea that permeates like fog. However, it is difficult to fully explain the similarities in design spanning thousands of kilometers solely through convergent evolution. The concept that emerges here is stimulus propagation. This refers to the phenomenon where abstract ideas or technical concepts are transmitted, even if specific objects such as pottery itself or people such as the group of makers do not move directly, such as being able to shape clay to make a vessel or carve regular patterns on the surface using tools. The steppe of the Neolithic era was not a wide open highway like in the Paleolithic era, but rather a vast network loosely connecting numerous tribes and communities. Through a chain process where Tribe A contacts Tribe B, and Tribe B then contacts Tribe C, information gradually spread across the Eurasian continent over thousands of years like a wave or fog. The steppes of this period were not a boundary dividing the centre and the periphery, but rather a space of cultural resonance where innovations from different regions inspired each other. The comb pattern pottery of the Korean Peninsula should be re-evaluated as a product of technological innovation achieved independently by connecting to the vast information network of Eurasia, rather than being seen as a derivative of Siberia. Part 3. The Third Wave, the Ideological Crucible and the Reconstruction of the Bronze Age. In the 3rd millennium BC, with the onset of the Bronze Age, the Eurasian steppes once again trembled violently, with the emergence of nomadic warrior groups armed with powerful technological packages, such as the domestication of horses, the invention of the wheel, and bronze metallurgy. The steppe transforms from a simple route of movement, or information network, into a melting pot of ideologies, where different civilizations' ideas collide and merge to give birth to new thoughts. 3.1. The Seymour Turbino phenomenon, the shock and diffusion of technology. Between around 2200 BC and 1900 BC, a strange and remarkable phenomenon was witnessed across Northern Eurasia. From Finland in the west to Mongolia and northern China in the east, extremely sophisticated bronze weapons began to be unearthed suddenly over an extensive area of about 7,000 kilometers. This is referred to as the Seymour Turbino ST phenomenon. The ST phenomenon is not a culture that settles in a specific area, but rather a transcultural phenomenon where technology rapidly spreads through a highly mobile warrior group. The technology package they disseminated was a culmination of high tech that was unimaginable at the time. Socketed spearhead. A spear with a hole socket for inserting the shaft and a hook for tying a cord next to it. Integral dagger. A method of casting the blade and shaft together from a single mold. Animal decoration. An artistic style that realistically depicts animals such as horses, goats, and snakes at the end of the shaft. Lost wax casting. An advanced metallurgy technique that creates complex and intricate shapes by making a model out of wax. This technological wave acted as a powerful catalyst during the dawn of East Asian Bronze Age civilization. However, this process was not merely an import of technology. 3.2. The secret of the birth of the biffa-type sword. 500 years of cultivation and creative reinvention. The lute-shaped dagger, a representative artifact of the Bronze Age in the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria Liaoning, appears to be similar to ST-type daggers at first glance. However, upon closer analysis, decisive traces of discontinuity and transformation are found between the two artifacts. The first is the chronological gap. The ST phenomenon disappears around 1900 BC, but the lute-shaped dagger appears no earlier than 1400 BC, and more prominently around 1000 BC. There exists a gap of over 500 years. This indicates that the ST group did not directly create the lute-shaped dagger in the Korean Peninsula. The second difference is structural. While the ST dagger emphasizes practicality by integrating the blade and handle into a single, integrated piece, the bifurcated sword opts for a modular structure, creating the blade, handle, and handle end decoration separately and assembling them. The key to unraveling this 500-year mystery lies in the intermediate link of the northern zone complex of T. The technology of ST was introduced around 1900 BC to the Siba culture in Gansu province, China, and the lower layer culture of the Liaoning region. In the Siba culture, the unique ST spear with side branches and mace heads have been discovered, providing evidence of direct contact. In this region, the metallurgy of St has been localized and cultivated for 500 years. Around the 14th century BC, when a new political group represented by Gojoseon emerged in the Liaoning and Korean Peninsula regions, they invented their own symbols based on this already internalized metallurgy. They did not simply copy the practical weapons of St. Instead, they created a splendid prestige good that showcased the authority of the rulers by making blades from rare bronze and combining them with handles made of jade or precious wood, rather than creating weapons. The bifacial dagger is a masterpiece of creative hybridity that reinterprets external technological stimuli St to meet subjective social needs. Display of authority. 3.3. Megalithic culture and the Yapnaya vector. The reason the ideology of death moved eastward. What the Bronze Age steppe network transported was not just technology. More importantly, it was the ideology, particularly thoughts about death and power. The Korean Peninsula is the center of megalithic culture, where more than half of the world's dolmens are concentrated. However, there is a 3,000-year gap between the dolmens of Western Europe Neolithic period, 4,500 BC, and those of the Korean Peninsula Bronze Age, 1,500 BC, along with a difference in nature between communal tombs and individual rulers' tombs. The link that bridges this gap is the Yamnaya culture from the northern Black Sea. Around 3000 BC, the Yamnaya people established a new ideology of monumental burial for powerful warriors rulers through massive burial mounds known as kurgans. They traveled eastward by wagon and left behind the Afanasyevo culture in the Altai region. Recent aDNA studies have proven that the Afanasyevo people are genetically almost identical to the Yamnaya. In this process, the idea of megalithic monuments from Western Europe combined with the ideology of burials for rulers kurgans through the steppes, and this new ideology of death spread to East Asia. Finally, when the wave of this thought reached the Korean Peninsula, the emerging elite of the peninsula implemented this ideology by constructing massive stone tombs, dolmens, using granite, a material familiar to them, instead of the earthen mounds, kurgans of the steppes. In particular, the global climate change that occurred around 2200 BC, 4.2 Ka BP event, was a decisive factor that accelerated this movement and diffusion. When the existing agricultural civilization faced a crisis due to aridification, the mobile steppe nomads expanded their influence and became mediators connecting the East and West. The dolmens of the Korean Peninsula are the result of a journey of ideology spanning 3,000 years, which uniquely blossomed at its final destination, the Korean Peninsula, after passing through the crucible of the steppe. Part 4. Broader connections. The globalization of chariots, genes, and art. The connections through the steppe were not limited to weapons or tomb styles. It was a comprehensive process of globalization that included genetics, blood, means of transportation, chariot, and aesthetic sense, art. 4.1. The Chariot of Yingxu and the Legacy of Sintashta. A superweapon that changed the landscape of ancient warfare. Around 1200 BC, a large number of highly developed chariots were excavated at the Yingxu site, which was the capital of the Shang dynasty in China. The surprising thing is that the structure and design of the spokes of these chariots are almost identical to the chariots invented around 2000 BC in the Sintashta culture near the Ural Mountains. This means that the tram was not independently invented gradually in China, but rather that a fully developed form of advanced weapon systems was imported in package form through the steppes. The nomads of the steppes transmitted this ancient world's tank not only to the Hittites and Egyptians in the Middle East, but also to the Eastern Chinese civilization. The background behind the Shang dynasty's ability to suppress surrounding tribes and establish a strong royal power was this overwhelming weapon system that came from the steppes. This serves as decisive evidence that the formation process of ancient states in East Asia is by no means unrelated to the steppes. 4.2. The history of migration etched in the genetic map. Ancient DNA analysis clearly shows that these cultural and technological exchanges were accompanied by actual movements of people. The paternal gene haplogroups R1a and R1b, which spread through the Eurasian steppe, not only reshaped the genetic makeup of Europeans, but also moved eastward, reaching Central Asia and the Tarim Basin, including mummies from the Shaohe Cemetery. Conversely, haplogroups N and Q, originating from East Asia, also spread westward and northward through the steppe. The steppe was a vast blood vessel, where genes mixed and flowed. 4.3. Scythian animal style, the first universal art of Eurasia. By the first millennium BC, a unique artistic trend known as Scythian Siberian animal style dominated Eurasia, reaching from the Black Sea coast to the Mongolian steppes and the Ordos region in northern China. The dynamic forms of curled-up deer and ferocious beasts, tigers, griffins, show that a shared aesthetic sense and worldview extended over thousands of kilometers. This suggests that cultural globalization was already completed before the Silk Road. Part 5. Beyond the fog of ideology. Historiography that transcends empires and nations. The vast archaeological and genetic evidence examined so far clearly shows that the prehistoric era of the Korean Peninsula has developed in close interaction with the Eurasian continent. But why have we not seen this obvious connection for so long? It was due to two powerful lenses created by modern historiography: imperialism and nationalism. 5.1. The distortion of imperialism and colonial historiography, the shackles of heteronomy. The colonial historiography, constructed by Japanese scholars during the Japanese occupation, thoroughly defined the history of the Korean Peninsula as heteronymous. They sought the causes of all cultural changes, in external invasions or influences from China or Japan. The continental similarities of bronze artifacts and other cultural relics were misused as evidence of dependency, proving that the Korean Peninsula lacked the ability to create an independent culture. For them, the steppe was not a civilization, but a space of barbarism, and the Korean Peninsula had to be a powerless existence, caught between that barbarism and the Chinese civilization. 5.2. The dilemma of nationalism. The wars of isolation. In resistance to this, the nationalism that was born emphasized a single ethnicity, uniqueness, and spontaneous development as absolute values to overcome colonial historiography. This inevitably led to a reduction or denial of exchanges or influences with the outside. It was a denial of the Siberian connections of comb pattern pottery and an unconditional assertion of the indigenous theory of the Korean Peninsula. Or it emphasized only the uniqueness of the dagger-shaped bronze sword while ignoring its underlying connection to steppe technology. Ultimately, while imperialism and nationalism seem to make opposing claims, in reality, they merely reflect mirror images of ideology in that they ignore the essence of history as exchange and connection and fit the past into modern political purposes. Both historical perspectives caused an academic chilling effect that isolated the Korean Peninsula, making it a disconnected island within the vast context of Eurasia. 5.3. Epistemological shift in the age of artificial intelligence, AI. AI as the other. Now we have in our hands new tools called AI and big data. AI can function as an epistemological other that is free from the ethnic and regional biases that human researchers inevitably possess. Analyzing tens of thousands of pottery pattern images through deep learning to uncover patterns unseen by humans, or visualizing migration routes through vast genomic data, can neutralize existing ideological debates and enable a data-driven, objective narrative of history. This will allow us to move away from the futile fight of who is the original, to a more fundamental question of how we are connected and how we were created. Conclusion. The creative hybrid, the true power of Korean Peninsula history. The landscape of the Korean Peninsula in prehistory, reconstructed through this study, was not an isolated land of seclusion, but rather an open field of innovation that breathed with the great pulse of the Eurasian continent. 1. In the late Paleolithic period, the Korean Peninsula was the forefront of the spread of modern humans racing along the steppe highway to the eastern edge, serving as a new starting point towards the Americas. The stone tool is a testament to that dynamic journey. 2. In the Neolithic period, the Korean Peninsula was a creative origin that first blossomed the unique and innovative technology of comb-patterned pottery based on shared ideas through the cultural network of the steppe. 3. During the Bronze Age, the Korean Peninsula actively embraced and transformed the massive external influences of Sema turban and the ideology of Yamna, creating a unique culture characterized by the distinctive bronze dagger and dolmens, serving as a fusion of ideologies. The true strength of Korean history does not lie in purity or uniqueness. It lies in the ability to fearlessly edit and merge the constant influx of external stimuli to create something entirely new, showcasing creative hybridity. The reason we need to revisit the history of the steppes is not simply to correct past facts. It is because it inspires us about who we are and how we should live in the future. The Eurasian steppes demonstrated a connected world thousands of years before the Silk Road. In today's world, where division and isolationism are re-emerging, the journey of prehistoric humanity, which communicated and exchanged across the continent for 50,000 years, emphasizes that openness and connection are the only paths to advanced civilization. Now, we should be able to hear the winds of Eurasia in a single line etched on a comb-patterned pottery, or in the massive capstone of a dolmen. Within that wind lies our ancient future.